The desert heat pressed down like a heavy blanket as the convoy rolled through the dusty streets of Kandahar. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez adjusted his helmet and checked his rifle for the third time in 10 minutes. Something felt different about this patrol. The locals weren't making eye contact, and the usual sounds of daily life seemed muted. "Eyes up, gentlemen," came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison through their comms. "Intel suggests possible IED activity in this sector." The SEAL team had been in Afghanistan for 6 months and they knew the signs. Empty streets during what should be busy hours, dogs barking nervously in the distance, the way shadows seemed to move just slightly too fast around corners. Rodriguez glanced at his teammates in the armored vehicle. There was Tommy Ghost Williams, their sniper, who could hit a target from 800 yards in a sandstorm. Next to him sat Carlos Mendez, their demolitions expert, fingers always twitching near his gear. In the front passenger seat, Petty Officer Sarah Chen monitored radio chatter, her eyes scanning the horizon through armored glass. The team had worked together for 2 years. They knew each other's breathing patterns, could predict each other's moves in combat, and trusted their lives to one another daily. But today felt different. Contact left, Williams shouted suddenly. The explosion came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The world turned upside down as their vehicle flipped, metal screaming against asphalt. Rodriguez felt his body slam against the ceiling, then the sidewall, then everything went dark for a moment. When consciousness returned, his ears were ringing and smoke filled his vision. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. Around him, his teammates were groaning and moving, which meant they were alive. "That was good. Sound off." Harrison's voice cut through the chaos, though it sounded distant and muffled. "Rodriguez, good to go," he called out, though his left shoulder felt like it was on fire. Williams, "Operational," came the sniper's voice from somewhere to his right. "Mendez here. Little banged up but ready," the demolitions expert replied. Chen responding, "Minor injuries." Sarah's voice was steady despite the circumstances. But as Rodriguez tried to orient himself in the overturned vehicle, he realized they weren't alone. In the corner, pressed against what used to be the roof, was a figure he hadn't noticed before. Someone small wearing civilian clothes, bleeding from a head wound. "We've got a civilian," Rodriguez called out, squinting through the smoke and dust. "Looks like a local girl, maybe 16 or 17. The figure stirred slightly but remained unconscious. Long dark hair covered most of her face and her clothes were torn and dusty from the explosion. She must have been caught in the blast when their vehicle flipped. "We need to move," Harrison commanded. This was coordinated. "They'll be coming to finish the job." Outside, Rodriguez could hear voices shouting in Pashto. The sound of boots on gravel was getting closer. Vehicle engines rumbled in the distance, approaching fast. Williams was already working on the rear exit, which was now partially crushed but still functional. 30 seconds and we're out," he reported. Rodriguez crawled toward the unconscious girl. She was breathing but unresponsive. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, and her left arm was bent at an odd angle. In a combat situation, they would normally leave civilians for local authorities or follow-up medical teams. But something about this felt wrong. The timing was too perfect. She had appeared in their vehicle as if from nowhere. "Boss, this girl," Rodriguez started to say, but gunfire erupted outside, cutting him off. "Move! Move! Move!" Harrison shouted. Williams kicked out the rear door and the team began their tactical exit. Rodriguez grabbed the girl under her arms and dragged her toward the opening. She was lighter than expected, almost unnaturally so for someone her apparent age. As they emerged from the wreckage, the situation became clear. 3 pickup trucks filled with armed fighters were converging on their position from different directions. The nearest cover was a concrete wall about 50 meters away, but it might as well have been 50 miles with an unconscious civilian to carry. "Suppressing fire," Harrison commanded, and his team responded immediately. The distinctive crack of Williams's sniper rifle echoed across the street as he took position behind the overturned vehicle. Mendez lobbed a flash grenade toward the nearest truck, buying them precious seconds. Chen coordinated with their base, calling for immediate extraction. Rodriguez half-carried, half-dragged the girl toward cover, her body a dead weight against his injured shoulder. Every step sent shooting pain through his arm, but he pushed forward. Behind them, bullets pinged off metal and concrete, sending chips flying in all directions. They reached the wall just as the second wave of fighters rounded the corner. Rodriguez positioned the girl behind a concrete barrier and checked her pulse. Still steady, still breathing. But something nagged at him. Her hands were too smooth for a local villager. Her clothes, while dusty and torn, were made from better fabric than most civilians in this area could afford. Extraction ETA 12 minutes, Chen reported, pressing herself against the wall as bullets whistled overhead. 12 minutes might as well be 12 hours in their current situation. They were outnumbered at least 3-1, low on ammunition, and stuck protecting an unconscious civilian who shouldn't have been in their vehicle in the first place. Williams's rifle cracked again, and one of the approaching fighters dropped. "That's 2 down," he called out. "But they're spreading out, trying to flank us." Rodriguez looked down at the girl again. Even unconscious and injured, there was something about her that seemed out of place. The way she was dressed, the condition of her hair despite the explosion, even the way she breathed seemed controlled, measured. "Rodriguez, what's your status on the civilian?" Harrison called out during a brief lull in the firefight. "Stable but unconscious, sir. Head trauma, possible broken arm." "But, sir..." Rodriguez hesitated, unsure how to voice his growing suspicions. "What is it?" "Something doesn't add up about her. She wasn't in our vehicle when we started the patrol." Before Harrison could respond, another volley of gunfire erupted around them. The girl stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open for just a moment. In that brief instant, Rodriguez saw something that made his blood run cold. Her eyes weren't the eyes of a frightened civilian. They were alert, calculating, and completely aware of everything happening around her. Then she was unconscious again, or pretending to be. The helicopter's rotors cut through the air like thunder as the extraction bird finally arrived. Rodriguez had spent the longest 12 minutes of his life watching the girl's face, looking for any sign that she was more aware than she appeared. Every few minutes, he caught subtle movements that didn't match someone in a genuine state of unconsciousness. "Load 'em up," the crew chief shouted over the rotor wash. Williams and Mendez provided covering fire while Harrison and Chen helped Rodriguez carry the girl to the helicopter. She remained limp, her head lolling to one side, but Rodriguez noticed her breathing pattern change slightly when the engines grew louder. It was almost as if she was adjusting to the noise level. Once airborne, Rodriguez finally had a chance to examine her more closely. The head wound was real enough, fresh blood still seeping from the cut on her forehead. But the more he looked, the more details jumped out at him. Her fingernails were clean and well-maintained. Her teeth, visible when her mouth fell open slightly, were straight and white. Most telling of all, there were no calluses on her hands despite appearing to be from a rural area where manual labor was common. "Doc Martinez is waiting at the base," Chen informed them through the headset. "to 4 minutes." Rodriguez nodded but couldn't shake his growing unease. He'd seen plenty of civilian casualties during his deployments. There was a certain randomness to blast injuries, a chaos that came from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this girl's injuries seemed almost theatrical. The head wound was positioned perfectly to bleed impressively without being life-threatening. Her broken arm was a clean fracture that would heal easily. Even her unconsciousness seemed timed to when people were watching her most closely. As they approached the base, Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. Instead of alerting his teammates to his suspicions immediately, he decided to watch and wait. If she was what he suspected, revealing his awareness too soon could be dangerous for everyone. The landing was smooth, and within minutes they were rushing toward the medical facility. Doc Martinez met them at the entrance with a gurney and 2 medics. The girl was transferred quickly, and Rodriguez found himself trailing behind as they wheeled her into the trauma bay. "I need everyone out except essential medical personnel," Doc Martinez called out as he began his initial assessment. Rodriguez started to leave with the others, but something made him pause at the door. Through the gap, he watched as Doc Martinez began cutting away the girl's torn clothing to assess her injuries properly. What he saw made him step back into the hallway, his heart pounding. Scars. Professional scars. The kind that came from training, not from the hard life of a rural villager. There was a faded mark on her shoulder that looked suspiciously like a bullet wound. Another on her ribs that could have been from a knife. These weren't the random marks of poverty or accident. They were the badges of someone who lived by violence. Rodriguez caught Doc Martinez's eye through the window and motioned him over. "Doc, I need to speak with you privately. Now." Martinez looked annoyed at the interruption but followed Rodriguez into a side room. What's so urgent that it can't wait until after I've treated her? Doc, look at her scars. Really look at them. Tell me what you see. Martinez was quiet for a moment, his medical training taking over. Those are unusual for a civilian. The pattern suggests knife training. The bullet wound is old but professional treatment. Why are you asking me this? Because she wasn't in our vehicle when we started patrol. She appeared during the explosion, and I don't think she's as unconscious as she's pretending to be. The color drained from Doc Martinez's face as the implications sank in. You think I think she's exactly what we don't want her to be. But we need to be smart about this. If I'm right, she's probably armed even now, and she's been listening to everything we've said. They looked back toward the trauma bay where the girl lay motionless on the gurney. Her breathing was steady, her face peaceful despite the blood on her forehead. But now that they were looking for it, both men could see the subtle signs. The way her muscles weren't quite as relaxed as they should be, the barely perceptible tension in her jaw. What do you want me to do? Martinez whispered. Continue treating her, but don't let her know we're suspicious. I need to alert the team and security. Can you sedate her without making it obvious? I can say she needs pain medication for the injuries. That would justify a sedative. Rodriguez nodded. Do it. And Doc? Be very careful. If I'm right about who she is, she's probably killed more people than our entire team combined. As Rodriguez left the medical bay, his mind raced through the possibilities. How had she gotten into their vehicle? Was the explosion planned to create exactly this scenario? Were there others working with her on the base? He found Harrison in the debriefing room filling out after-action reports. Sir, we need to talk privately. Harrison looked up from his paperwork, immediately recognizing the urgency in Rodriguez's voice. What is it? The girl. I don't think she's what she appears to be. Rodriguez laid out his observations quickly but thoroughly. The scars, the 2 perfect injuries, the way she'd appeared in their vehicle. Harrison listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. You're suggesting she's an operative? I'm suggesting she's exactly what we've been hunting for 6 months. Remember the intelligence reports about a female assassin working with the Taliban? Someone trained by foreign operatives, someone who could blend in with civilians? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. The reports Rodriguez mentioned had been circulating for months. A ghost who could infiltrate secure areas, eliminate high-value targets, and disappear without a trace. They'd called her the Silent One because her victims never saw her coming. If you're right, she's been inside our perimeter for 20 minutes. She could have detailed intelligence on our operations, our security protocols, everything. That's what I'm afraid of, sir. Harrison stood up abruptly. Alert security immediately. I want her isolated and under constant guard. No one goes near her alone, and I want a full sweep of her belongings and the crash site. As Rodriguez moved toward the door, Harrison called after him. Rodriguez? Good catch. If she is who we think she is, you just saved a lot of lives. But as Rodriguez hurried toward the security office, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. If the girl was truly the Silent One, then she had already seen everything she needed to see. The question wasn't whether she would try to escape or strike. The question was when. Security Chief Master Sergeant Thompson listened to Rodriguez's report with the practiced calm of someone who had seen every possible threat during his 15 years in special operations. But even Thompson's weathered face showed concern as the details mounted. You're telling me we potentially have the Silent One unconscious in our medical bay right now? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Chief. Thompson was already reaching for his radio before Rodriguez finished speaking. All units code yellow. Implement Lockdown Protocol 7. Medical bay is now a restricted zone. Within minutes, the base transformed. Armed guards took positions at key points. Blast doors sealed non-essential areas, and medical bay became a fortress within a fortress. But Thompson knew that if their suspicions were correct, they might already be too late. Sir, came a voice from the radio. This is Martinez in medical. The subject is showing signs of consciousness but refusing to respond to verbal stimuli. Thompson and Rodriguez exchanged glances. A truly unconscious person would show involuntary responses to certain tests. Someone pretending would have to work very hard to suppress natural reflexes. Doc, I need you to run a full neurological assessment, test her reflexes, pupil response, everything, and document every reaction, no matter how small. They hurried to the medical bay, where Doc Martinez was already working with practiced efficiency. The girl lay motionless on the examination table, IVs in her arm, monitors tracking her vital signs. But something had changed since Rodriguez first saw her. There was a tension in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. Her reflexes are interesting, Martinez reported quietly. Pupils respond normally to light, but when I test pain response, she shows perfect control. Too perfect for someone with a head injury. Thompson studied the monitors. Heart rate steady at 65 beats per minute. Blood pressure normal. Breathing regular and controlled. For someone who had survived a vehicle explosion and serious injuries, she was remarkably stable. Has she said anything? Not a word. But twice I've caught her eyes tracking movement when she thought no one was looking directly at her. Rodriguez moved closer to the examination table. This close, he could see details that confirmed his worst fears. The girl's muscle tone was exceptional, the kind that came from years of intense physical training. Her hands, despite being cleaned of blood, showed faint marks that suggested weapons handling. Chief, we need to search her belongings and run her fingerprints through every database we have access to. Already in progress. But Rodriguez, if she is who we think she is, her prints won't be in any standard database. People like her don't exist on paper. At that moment, the girl's eyes opened slowly as if emerging naturally from unconsciousness. She blinked several times, looking confused and frightened. When she saw the armed guards and multiple people surrounding her, she tried to sit up quickly and immediately winced, falling back against the pillow. "Please," she said in accented but clear English. "Where am I? What happened?" Her performance was flawless. The confusion seemed genuine, the fear authentic. If Rodriguez hadn't noticed the earlier inconsistencies, he would have believed completely that she was simply an injured civilian caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. "You're safe," Doc Martinez said gently. "You were injured in an explosion. Do you remember anything?" She touched her bandaged forehead carefully and shook her head. "I was walking to my uncle's house. There was a loud noise and then... nothing." Her eyes filled with tears. "Am I in an American hospital?" Thompson stepped forward, his expression neutral but alert. "What's your name?" Amira Rashid. "Please, I need to contact my family. They will be worried." Her story was perfect. Too perfect. She had answers for everything, delivered with just the right amount of hesitation and confusion. But Rodriguez caught something others missed. When she said her name, there was the slightest pause, as if she was remembering which identity to use. "Amira, we're going to take good care of you," Thompson said. "But we need to ask you some questions about the explosion." "For security reasons?" She nodded eagerly, perhaps too eagerly. "Of course. I want to help. Those men who attacked the soldiers, they are not from my village. We are peaceful people." As she spoke, Rodriguez watched her hands. She kept them relaxed and open, the posture of someone with nothing to hide. But occasionally her fingers would twitch slightly and he recognized the movement. She was unconsciously reaching for weapons that weren't there. "Doc, how long before she can be moved?" Thompson asked quietly. "The head injury requires monitoring for at least 24 hours. The arm fracture is stable but needs time to set properly." Thompson nodded, but Rodriguez could see him calculating. 24 hours was a long time to keep a potential enemy operative in their medical facility. Too long if she was planning something. "Chief," Rodriguez said quietly, "I'd like to stay with her, as part of the security detail." Approved. "But Rodriguez, do not underestimate her if your suspicions are correct. Intelligence suggests the Silent One has eliminated targets in hospitals before." As the others left, Rodriguez took a position where he could watch both the girl and the entrance to the medical bay. She appeared to drift back into sleep, her breathing becoming deep and regular, but he noticed that her position had changed slightly. She was now angled where she could see both exits and had clear access to several medical instruments that could be used as weapons. Hours passed quietly. Rodriguez remained alert, watching for any sign that her unconsciousness was feigned. Other guards rotated through, but Rodriguez stayed, driven by a certainty that relaxing vigilance for even a moment could be fatal. Near midnight, everything changed. The lights flickered once, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in dim red. In that moment of transition from bright to dark, Rodriguez heard the soft whisper of movement from the examination table. When his eyes adjusted, the girl was sitting up, her injured arm moving freely despite the supposedly broken bone. Her eyes, no longer confused or frightened, held a coldness that made Rodriguez's blood freeze. "You are very observant, Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, her accent now much less pronounced. I wondered when you would figure it out. Rodriguez's hand moved toward his sidearm, but she was already in motion. Moving like liquid shadow, she rolled off the examination table and swept up a scalpel from the medical tray. In the dim emergency lighting, she looked exactly like what she was, a predator who had been pretending to be prey. "The lights will be back on in 30 seconds, she said calmly. "When they are, you will tell everyone that I'm still unconscious and recovering normally. If you do not, people will die, starting with the young medic who has been checking on me every hour." Rodriguez knew he was facing a professional killer, someone trained by experts and hardened by years of successful operations. But he was also a Navy SEAL, and he had not survived multiple deployments by backing down from threats. "Who are you really?" She smiled, and in that expression, Rodriguez saw something that explained why her victims never saw her coming. It wasn't cruelty or madness. It was the calm certainty of someone who had never failed to complete a mission. "I am exactly who you think I am, and Rodriguez, my mission here is not yet complete." The standoff lasted exactly 28 seconds before the main power returned. In those crucial moments, Rodriguez made a decision that would define everything that followed. Instead of raising an alarm that might trigger a massacre, he chose to play her game while planning his own moves. "Smart choice," she whispered as the lights came back on, immediately returning to her position on the examination table and resuming her act of unconsciousness. But Rodriguez had seen enough in those brief moments. The way she moved spoke of training that went far beyond typical insurgent capabilities. This was someone trained by professionals, possibly by former special operations personnel or intelligence operatives from hostile nations. Doc Martinez entered for his hourly check, unaware of what had just transpired. Rodriguez watched as the girl maintained perfect unconsciousness even when Martinez tested her pain responses with a pin. She had the kind of control that took years to develop. "Any changes?" Martinez asked quietly. "Nothing significant," Rodriguez replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Vitals remain stable." After Martinez left, Rodriguez began planning. He couldn't simply shoot her without proof of hostile intent, and her threat about the medic suggested she had already identified targets throughout the base. But he also couldn't let her complete whatever mission had brought her here. The girl's breathing remained deep and regular, but Rodriguez noticed subtle signs that she was listening to everything happening around them. When footsteps passed in the hallway, her breathing would pause almost imperceptibly. When voices carried from other parts of the medical facility, her head would turn slightly toward the sound. Near dawn, Rodriguez's radio crackled softly. "Rodriguez, report to debriefing in 10 minutes. He looked at the girl, who appeared deeply asleep, but he knew she had heard every word. "Chief Thompson, this is Rodriguez. I need to remain with the patient. Can you send the briefing materials here?" A pause. "Negative. This requires your immediate presence." Rodriguez realized he was being tested, either by his own command or by the girl herself. If he left, would she make her move? Or was this exactly what she wanted, to separate him from his post? "Sir, I strongly recommend against leaving the patient unattended." Another pause, longer this time. Then Thompson's voice with a different tone. "Understood. Maintaining current positions." Rodriguez felt a small surge of relief. Thompson was reading between the lines. As morning progressed, more details emerged about the previous day's explosion. The crash site investigation had revealed something troubling. The IED had been positioned with surgical precision, designed not to kill but to disable their vehicle at a specific location. It was as if someone had known their exact route and timing. But even more disturbing was what they found in the wreckage. Hidden beneath the rear seat was a small electronic device that their explosives expert Mendez identified as a sophisticated listening device. Someone had been monitoring their communications, possibly for weeks. Rodriguez processed this information while keeping watch on the girl. If she was part of a larger operation, then her presence here wasn't opportunistic. It was planned. But for what purpose? The answer came during the afternoon shift change. As new guards rotated in, Rodriguez caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. One of the incoming security personnel, someone he didn't recognize, moved with the same fluid precision as the girl. When the man thought no one was watching, his eyes swept the medical bay with professional efficiency, cataloging exits, weapon positions, and defensive advantages. Rodriguez keyed his radio discreetly. Chief Thompson, we need to talk. Priority Alpha. Within minutes, Thompson arrived with Williams and Mendez. Rodriguez briefed them quickly on his observations about the guard. That's Corporal Anders, Thompson said. He transferred in last week from forward operations. Sir, I think we need to verify that transfer very carefully. Williams, who had been observing the girl throughout Rodriguez's report, suddenly held up his hand for silence. She's awake, he whispered. They all turned to look. The girl appeared exactly as she had for hours, unconscious, breathing steadily, completely still. But Williams was their sniper, trained to notice the smallest details. Her eyelids. Watch the movement under her eyelids. People in real unconsciousness have random eye movement. Hers follows our conversation. Thompson made a decision. Everyone except Rodriguez out now. As the others left, Thompson approached the examination table. Miss Rashid, I know you're awake. We need to talk. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her eyes opened slowly, and when she looked at Thompson, all pretense was gone. This was not a confused village girl. This was a professional looking at another professional. Master Sergeant Thompson, she said, his name and rank proving she had indeed been listening to everything. You have a reputation for directness. I appreciate that. Who are you, really? Someone who could have killed half your base by now if that had been my objective. Thompson's hand moved toward his weapon, but she held up one finger in a gesture that somehow commanded attention rather than threatened. Before you decide I'm your enemy, you should know that Corporal Anders, who is currently positioning himself outside this building, is not who he claims to be. Neither are the two maintenance workers who arrived yesterday, or the supply clerk who has been asking very specific questions about your communications schedule. Rodriguez felt the pieces clicking into place. You're not here to attack us. You're here to warn us. She nodded slightly. My real name is Nadia Kasabian. I work for an organization that your government occasionally finds useful. We have been tracking a cell that has spent months infiltrating this base. They plan to strike during tonight's resupply operation. Thompson studied her carefully. Why should we believe anything you say? Because in approximately 30 seconds, your communications officer is going to receive what appears to be routine traffic, but which actually contains a coded signal that will trigger the attack. The explosion yesterday was designed to get me inside your perimeter so I could identify the infiltrators and warn you. As if on cue, Thompson's radio crackled. Chief, incoming traffic from command. Looks routine, but the encryption seems off. Thompson looked at Nadia with new understanding. You arranged the explosion. I arranged to be in your convoy when an attack I couldn't prevent occurred. The difference is significant. Rodriguez realized they were facing something far more complex than a simple enemy infiltration. This was a multi-layered operation where allies and enemies were not always clearly defined. What do you need from us? Thompson asked. Trust me for the next 6 hours. Let me help you identify all the infiltrators before they realize their operation is compromised. After that, you can decide whether to arrest me or thank me. Thompson was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that could determine the fate of everyone on the base. Rodriguez, you've been right about everything so far. What's your assessment? Rodriguez looked at Nadia, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as a helpless victim or a ruthless enemy, but as someone caught in the same dangerous gray area where they all operated. I think we're about to find out who our real friends are. Thompson made the hardest decision of his military career. We're going to trust you, but with conditions. Rodriguez stays with you at all times. Any move we don't like, any sign you're playing us, and this ends badly for everyone. Nadia sat up carefully, her injured arm moving more freely than it should have. The arm was never broken. I needed to appear genuinely injured to maintain my cover. She reached under her hospital gown and produced a small device that looked like a medical monitor, but was clearly something else entirely. This has been recording everything since I arrived. Voice patterns, communication protocols, guard rotations, everything the infiltrators would need to time their attack perfectly. Rodriguez watched as she activated the device, displaying a complex readout that meant nothing to him, but clearly meant everything to her. How many infiltrators are we talking about? 5 that I've confirmed. Possibly more. They've been here for different lengths of time, establishing themselves as trusted personnel. Corporal Anders is their communications specialist. The maintenance workers, Hassan and Mahmoud, are demolitions experts. The supply clerk, Johnson, has been mapping your ammunition storage and security protocols. Thompson was already on his radio, speaking in coded language to trusted personnel. Within minutes, discreet surveillance was being established on each suspect without alerting them to the change. There's a fifth one I haven't identified yet, Nadia continued. Someone with access to classified information who has been providing detailed intelligence about your operations. Someone high enough in your command structure to know patrol routes in advance. The implications hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. That's how they knew exactly where to place the IED. Someone told them our route. More than that. Someone has been feeding them information for months. Every operation you've run, every target you've hit, they've known about in advance. Thompson's face had gone pale. That explains the casualties in the Helmand operation. The ambush and coast, they weren't tactical failures. We were compromised from the beginning. Nadia nodded grimly. Your mole has been very careful, very professional. But tonight they're going to expose themselves. The attack plan requires someone with command authority to make specific changes to your security protocols. Someone who can order guards away from key positions without raising suspicion. Rodriguez felt sick. He thought about all the operations that had gone wrong. All the teammates who had died in ambushes that seemed too well coordinated to be luck. How do we catch them? We let the operation proceed, but on our terms. I've modified the intelligence they've been receiving. They think they know your current security setup, but the information is wrong. When they move tonight, they'll expose themselves. Thompson was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what they were facing. You're asking us to use our own base as bait. I'm asking you to turn the trap around. They've been hunting you for months. Tonight you hunt them. Over the next several hours, a careful plan emerged. Nadia would maintain her cover as an unconscious patient, while feeding corrected intelligence through Rodriguez to Thompson. The infiltrators would be allowed to continue their preparations, but under constant surveillance. As evening approached, the tension became almost unbearable. Rodriguez watched the monitors as the suspected infiltrators moved through their routine duties, not knowing they were being watched. Corporal Anders was at his communications post, occasionally sending what appeared to be routine messages, but were clearly coded updates to someone outside the base. The maintenance workers had requested access to areas near the ammunition depot, claiming routine electrical work. The supply clerk had stayed late, ostensibly to catch up on inventory, but actually downloading files from secured computers. Movement on the perimeter, came Williams's voice through Rodriguez's earpiece. Williams was positioned as Overwatch, using his sniper skills to monitor approaches to the base. Multiple vehicles moving without lights. Estimate 20 to 30 personnel. Nadia checked her device. That's more than we expected. They must have called in additional support. Thompson's voice cut through the radio chatter. All units, take down the infiltrators simultaneously, Thompson commanded. We cannot let any of them communicate with the external attack force. The next few minutes unfolded with military precision. Years of training and the element of surprise gave Thompson's loyal personnel a decisive advantage. Anders was neutralized at the communications center before he could send a warning. Hassan and Mahmoud were taken down as they attempted to plant explosives near the ammunition depot. Johnson put up more resistance at the armory, but Williams's precision shooting ended the threat quickly and quietly. The most difficult takedown was Morrison, who had command training and knew their tactics. But surrounded by people he had betrayed, his resistance was brief. External forces are still approaching, Williams reported. They don't know their inside support has been eliminated. Nadia smiled grimly. Now comes the beautiful part. Your infiltrators were supposed to disable specific defensive positions and open predetermined entry points. Instead, those positions are fully manned and waiting. Rodriguez watched through night vision as the attacking force approached what they believed were compromised defenses. They moved with confidence, following a plan that had been carefully fed to them through the captured infiltrators. They're heading straight into the kill zone, Thompson observed with professional satisfaction. The battle, when it came, was devastatingly one-sided. The attackers found themselves caught in crossfire from positions they thought were abandoned, facing defenses they believed were disabled. Within 20 minutes it was over. As dawn broke over the base, Rodriguez finally allowed himself to relax. The immediate threat was ended, the infiltrators were in custody, and Nadia's warnings had saved countless lives. So what happens to you now? He asked her as medics finally began treating her real injuries from the explosion. That depends on your commanders. My organization and yours don't always see eye to eye, but we occasionally find ourselves fighting the same enemies. Thompson approached, looking exhausted but satisfied. I've been in contact with higher command. There are going to be a lot of questions, but also a lot of gratitude. The intelligence you provided has already prevented attacks on 3 other bases. Nadia nodded. The network Morrison was feeding information to was larger than just this operation. His capture will help roll up cells across the entire region. Rodriguez realized that what had started as a routine patrol had uncovered something far more significant than anyone had imagined. How long have you been tracking this network? 8 months. Morrison was recruited almost 2 years ago, but it took time for him to gain access to truly sensitive information. We've been waiting for them to make a move significant enough to justify exposing our operation. And nearly getting killed in an explosion was worth it? Nadia touched her bandaged forehead. The head injury was real and painful, but it was necessary to maintain credibility. If your Sergeant Rodriguez hadn't been so observant, the deception might have continued too long to be useful. Thompson studied her with new respect. What kind of organization are you really with? The kind that exists in the spaces between official policies. We handle situations that regular military and intelligence operations cannot address directly. Rodriguez understood. In the complex world of modern warfare, where enemies wore friendly uniforms and allies sometimes worked in shadows, organizations like Nadia's filled crucial gaps. Will we see you again? Probably not. My effectiveness depends on anonymity. After today, too many people know my face. As preparations began for Nadia's departure, Rodriguez reflected on the past 24 hours. He had started as a soldier following orders and ended as someone who had helped prevent a massacre through careful observation and willingness to trust his instincts. The official reports would tell a sanitized version of events, but Rodriguez would remember the moment when he realized that survival often depended not on following protocols, but on recognizing when those protocols were being used against them. Nadia was loaded onto a helicopter that bore no military markings. As it lifted off, Rodriguez wondered about the other shadows moving through the war, the other operations happening just outside official recognition. You did good work, Rodriguez, Thompson said, watching the helicopter disappear into the distance. Just following my training. Chief, no, you went beyond training. You trusted your instincts when they contradicted what you were seeing. That's what saved us. Rodriguez nodded, but his thoughts were already moving to the next patrol, the next mission. Because in a war where enemies could wear any face and allies might emerge from the most unexpected places, staying alive meant never stopping the careful work of watching, questioning, and trusting the quiet voice that whispered when something wasn't quite right. Operation Mousetrap is now active. Repeat, Operation Mousetrap is active. Rodriguez knew that around the base, trusted personnel were quietly moving into position, while the infiltrators continued their preparations, unaware that their every move was being monitored and countered. Contact, Williams reported. Anders is moving toward the communications center. He's carrying something that's not standard equipment. Through her monitoring device, Nadia tracked the electromagnetic signatures around the base. He's got a jamming device. In 30 seconds, your external communications are going to go dark. That's the signal for the outside attack to begin. Rodriguez keyed his radio. All teams, communications blackout imminent. Switch to backup frequencies. At exactly 2147 hours, the base's primary communication systems went silent. But instead of creating chaos, the blackout revealed the infiltrators like a spotlight. Each of them began moving simultaneously, heading toward predetermined positions that would have given them control of key defensive points. Hassan and Mahmoud are heading for the ammunition depot, Rodriguez reported, watching through the security cameras that the infiltrators didn't know had been rerouted to backup power. Johnson is trying to access the armory, came another report. But the most critical development came from Thompson himself. I've got eyes on our mole. Lieutenant Morrison is trying to access the command bunker with override codes. Rodriguez felt his heart sink. Morrison was someone they all trusted, someone who had served with distinction for over 10 years. But the evidence was undeniable as they watched him input codes that would have given the attacking force access to their most sensitive defensive positions, all units. 3 weeks after the infiltration was stopped, Rodriguez found himself in a briefing room at Bagram Air Base. facing officers whose ranks and clearance levels were far above his pay grade. The investigation into Lieutenant Morrison's betrayal had expanded far beyond their small base, uncovering a network that reached into multiple command structures across the theater. "Sergeant Rodriguez," said Colonel Patricia Hayes, the intelligence officer leading the investigation, "your observations and actions prevented what could have been the most successful enemy operation of the war, but we need to understand exactly how you identified the threat." Rodriguez had been through this debriefing multiple times, but each session revealed new layers of the conspiracy they had uncovered. Morrison's betrayal had provided enemy forces with intelligence that led to the deaths of 47 American and Allied personnel over 18 months. Operations that had seemed like tactical failures were now understood to be deliberate ambushes. "Ma'am, it started with small details that didn't add up. The way the civilian appeared in our vehicle, her physical condition, the timing of everything. But the real breakthrough was recognizing that someone on our side had to be providing intelligence for the attack to be so precisely coordinated." Colonel Hayes nodded. "The woman you knew as Amira Rashid, whose real name we now know as Nadia Kasabian, has provided intelligence that has led to the capture of 17 enemy operatives and the prevention of 12 planned attacks. Her organization has been tracking this network for over a year. Rodriguez had wondered about Nadia's fate since she disappeared on that unmarked helicopter. Is she classified? But I can tell you that her intelligence has been invaluable, and her willingness to place herself in danger to warn us has been noted at the highest levels." The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering details that painted a picture of enemy sophistication that was both impressive and terrifying. The infiltration network had been recruiting American personnel for years, using a combination of financial incentives, blackmail, and ideological manipulation. Morrison, it turned out, had been compromised through gambling debts that had spiraled out of control. What started as small favors in exchange for debt relief had gradually escalated until he was providing detailed operational intelligence. The enemy had been patient, building his dependency over time until retreat was impossible. The psychological profile suggests he genuinely believed he was minimizing casualties by providing intelligence that would end the war more quickly, Colonel Hayes explained. "It's a rationalization we've seen before." Rodriguez thought about Morrison, remembering shared meals and conversations about home. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal for everyone who had trusted him. "Sir, what's our security protocol going forward? If they could turn Morrison, they could turn others." "That's exactly why you're here, Rodriguez. Your experience with this case has led to your selection for a new program. We're establishing rapid response teams specifically trained to identify and counter infiltration attempts." Rodriguez felt a mix of pride and apprehension. Recognition was gratifying, but it also meant more responsibility and more danger. "The program will require additional training and likely deployment to multiple theaters," Colonel Hayes continued. "It's voluntary, but your unique experience makes you an ideal candidate." Before Rodriguez could respond, an aide entered and whispered something to the colonel. Her expression changed immediately. "Sergeant, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. There's been another incident, and the preliminary reports suggest patterns similar to what you encountered." They moved quickly to an operations center where multiple screens displayed intelligence from a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan. Rodriguez recognized the signs immediately. A coordinated attack that seemed to anticipate defensive measures, casualties that suggested inside knowledge of patrol routes, and response patterns that indicated enemy forces had detailed knowledge of American tactics. 12 hours ago, FOB Chapman came under attack, the operations officer briefed them. The enemy knew exactly where our rapid response teams would deploy and had countermeasures ready. 3 dead, 8 wounded, and significant intelligence potentially compromised. Rodriguez studied the tactical maps and casualty reports. "Sir, this has the same signature as Morrison's intelligence leaks. Someone provided detailed information about defensive positions and response protocols." "Our thoughts exactly. We're sending you and a specialized team to Chapman immediately. Your mission is to identify how the enemy obtained their intelligence and determine if we have another infiltration situation." As Rodriguez prepared for deployment, he thought about Nadia's warning that the network was larger than they had initially understood. Morrison's capture had apparently not ended the threat but merely forced it to adapt. The flight to FOB Chapman gave Rodriguez time to review the intelligence files on the base's personnel. Unlike his previous experience, this time he was looking for infiltrators from the beginning. Armed with knowledge about enemy recruitment methods and behavioral patterns, the base commander, Major Sarah Chen, met them at the landing zone. Rodriguez recognized her immediately as someone carrying the weight of recent losses. "Major, I need to understand the timeline of yesterday's attack," Rodriguez began. "They knew everything, Sergeant. Our defensive positions, our reaction time, even our communication frequencies. It was like they had our battle plans." Rodriguez spent the next several hours interviewing personnel and reviewing security footage. Unlike the obvious infiltrators at his previous base, this situation was more subtle. There were no clear behavioral anomalies, no obvious security breaches. But as he dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Small pieces of information that individually seemed harmless, but collectively provided a complete picture of the base's vulnerabilities. A supply clerk who asked detailed questions about ammunition storage. A communications specialist who showed unusual interest in encryption protocols. A medic who had access to casualty evacuation plans. "Major, I think we're dealing with multiple low-level intelligence gatherers rather than a single high-value asset," Rodriguez reported. "Each person provides small pieces of information that seem routine, but together they create a complete operational picture." Chen studied the analysis Rodriguez had prepared. "You're suggesting we have 3 or 4 people working together?" "I'm suggesting we have 3 or 4 people who may not even know they're working together. Each thinks they're providing minor favors or routine information to someone they trust, but there's a handler coordinating their activities and assembling the intelligence." The realization was both disturbing and enlightening. This was a more sophisticated approach than Morrison's direct recruitment. Instead of compromising high-value targets, the enemy was building networks of unwitting informants who didn't understand the significance of the information they were providing. How do we identify the handler? Rodriguez thought about Nadia's methods, how she had used electronic surveillance to track communication patterns. "We need to monitor all external communications and look for patterns. The handler has to be receiving regular reports from multiple sources and transmitting compiled intelligence to operational units." As night fell over FOB Chapman, Rodriguez prepared for what he suspected would be another long period of careful observation. But this time he was hunting not just for infiltrators, but for the ghost who was coordinating them. Someone smart enough to stay in the shadows while others took the risks. The enemy had evolved their tactics in response to Morrison's capture. Now Rodriguez had to evolve his methods to stay ahead of them. The war was becoming increasingly complex, fought as much with information and psychological manipulation as with bullets and explosives. Rodriguez settled into his observation post, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, multiple networks were gathering intelligence, planning attacks and adapting to countermeasures. His job was to find them before they found their next targets. 2 months later, Rodriguez stood in the Pentagon briefing room that would change his understanding of everything he thought he knew about modern warfare. The walls were lined with maps showing infiltration networks across multiple continents, connected by red lines that revealed a scope of enemy operations far beyond anything he had imagined. "Sergeant Rodriguez," said General Marcus Webb, the Joint Chiefs Intelligence Director, "your work at Chapman and 3 subsequent bases has uncovered something unprecedented. We're not dealing with isolated cells or random recruitment. This is a coordinated global operation." The investigation that had started with Nadia's warning about infiltrators at his base had expanded into Operation Silent Hunt, a joint intelligence effort involving multiple agencies and allied nations. Rodriguez's methods for identifying behavioral patterns and communication networks had become the standard protocol for counter-infiltration operations. "Sir, are you saying the networks are connected internationally?" "We're saying that the techniques used to recruit Morrison, the coordination methods you discovered at Chapman, and similar operations we've identified in Europe and Asia all show evidence of centralized training and coordination. Someone is running a school for this type of warfare." Rodriguez studied the global map, seeing connections that painted a picture of enemy capabilities that were both sophisticated and terrifying. Red pins marked confirmed infiltrations, yellow pins marked suspected operations, and blue lines showed communication networks that spanned continents. "The woman who warned you, Nadia Kasabian, has been instrumental in tracking these networks," General Webb continued. Her organization has been monitoring this threat for 3 years, but your ground-level identification methods have provided the operational intelligence needed to begin rolling them up. Rodriguez felt a familiar mix of pride and concern. Success in this type of warfare meant discovering threats that were often more dangerous than conventional enemies. "Sir, what's our next step?" "Your next step, Sergeant, is accepting a promotion to Staff Sergeant and assignment to a joint task force that will be hunting these networks globally. You'll be working with intelligence operatives from multiple allied nations, including personnel from Nadia's organization." The offer was both everything Rodriguez had worked toward and more responsibility than he had ever imagined. Leading counter-infiltration operations meant constant danger, frequent deployment, and the weight of protecting operations across multiple theaters. "You don't have to decide immediately," General Webb said, reading Rodriguez's expression. "But I will tell you that in the 6 months since Morrison's capture, your methods have prevented enemy operations that would have resulted in hundreds of casualties. The techniques you've developed are saving lives every day." Rodriguez thought about his teammates, about the attacks that had been prevented, about the network still operating in the shadows. The choice, when he really considered it, wasn't difficult. "Sir, I accept." The next phase of Rodriguez's career began immediately. Within a week, he was at a classified facility in Virginia, training with operatives whose backgrounds and methods would have seemed like fiction just months earlier. The curriculum covered everything from psychological profiling to electronic surveillance to cultural infiltration techniques. His instructor for behavioral analysis was someone he recognized immediately. Despite significant changes in appearance, Nadia Kasabian looked like a university professor, rather than the bloodied civilian he had first encountered, but her eyes held the same intelligence and determination. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said as they met in a secure briefing room, "I'm glad to see you survived your introduction to this type of warfare." "I had good warning from a reliable source," he replied. Their training sessions revealed the true scope of what they were facing. The enemy networks weren't just gathering military intelligence. They were building long-term capabilities to influence political, economic, and social systems. Military infiltration was just one component of a much larger strategy. "The goal isn't just to win battles," Nadia explained during one session. "It's to fundamentally alter the strategic environment by making democratic nations doubt their own institutions and personnel. Every successful infiltration, even when discovered, creates suspicion that weakens operational effectiveness." Rodriguez began to understand that his work wasn't just about catching spies. It was about preserving the trust that made effective military operations possible. The first operational deployment for the Joint Task Force came sooner than expected. Intelligence indicated a major infiltration operation, targeting NATO command structures in Europe. Rodriguez found himself in Brussels, working with operatives from 6 different nations to identify and neutralize threats that could compromise alliance operations. The operation lasted 3 weeks and resulted in the capture of 12 infiltrators and the disruption of communication networks spanning 5 countries. But more importantly, it validated the methods. Rodriguez had developed and demonstrated that international cooperation could counter even sophisticated enemy operations. Standing in his hotel room in Brussels after the operation's conclusion, Rodriguez received a secure communication that would define his new role permanently. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, this is General Webb. Your performance in Operation Silent Hunt has been exceptional. We're establishing a permanent multinational counter-infiltration task force, and we want you to lead the operational component." Rodriguez looked out at the city lights, thinking about how far he had traveled from that dusty convoy in Afghanistan where everything began. The enemy had evolved, becoming more sophisticated and more dangerous. But the methods for stopping them had evolved as well. "Sir, I understand the assignment. When do we begin?" "You began months ago, Rodriguez. Now you're going to expand the mission." As Rodriguez prepared for his new responsibilities, he thought about Nadia's warning that had started everything. She had risked her life to prevent attacks against people she had never met, trusting that they would recognize the truth when it was presented clearly. The networks they were fighting represented a fundamental threat to the trust that made military operations possible. But Rodriguez had learned that trust could also be a weapon, allowing people from different nations and organizations to work together against common threats. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown number. The networks adapt quickly. Stay vigilant. Stay alive. And Rodriguez smiled, knowing that somewhere in the shadows Nadia and others like her were continuing their own missions. The war against infiltration would never truly end, but it could be managed by people willing to pay attention to details, trust their instincts, and work together across traditional boundaries. He packed his gear and prepared for his next assignment, knowing that every operation would require the same careful observation that had started with an injured civilian who wasn't quite what she seemed. In a world where enemies could wear any face and allies might emerge from unexpected places, success depended on never stopping the careful work of watching, questioning, and protecting the trust that held everything together. The war had taught him that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with the quiet courage to see clearly and act decisively when everything depended on getting it right. Rodriguez was ready for whatever came next.